Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel, Tomcat Stitchery. I'm Whitney and I'm here with the Sunday Sew Along, but we're doing another tutorial this week because I just haven't had, life has just really been throwing the punches lately, so I just didn't have time this past week to film the Mountain View sew along. So that will be, fingers crossed everything goes okay, up. First part will be up on Sunday next week. Not sure how many parts that will be, probably at least 3 or 4, I would think, for the full thing, but they are a pull-on pant. So yes, that will be starting next Sunday. So if that's something you're interested in sewing along with, definitely hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of the installments of that. Okay, so for today, I am showing how I do my biased tape finishing on the inside, like a waistband, the inside of a waistband. So I've got my Love Notion Duet Trousers. I actually threw them in the wash and gave them a good dry, and I haven't ironed them yet, so it's rolling up on itself a little. It doesn't normally do that, or it won't after I give it a press. So these are the Duet Trousers by Love Notions. You can make these in a stretch, like a knit, or a woven fabric. I have done a stretch woven on mine. I will be showing these in their entirety on the channel this week. They're going to be part of a Sew the Trends video, so I'm not showing them on me today. But yeah, I'm going to show you how to do, if you want to, you know, a lot of times patterns have you folding under the inside of the waistband facing and then sewing those down. But this is an alternative, something you can do just so you can have something kind of fun on the inside of your pants. Just, you know, one of those details that makes sewing fun. Anyway, so I'm showing how I put the bias tape binding on the inside of waistbands, and I'm also showing you, so these are pull-on pants, although this pattern does come with a side zip if you would like one, but this woven fabric was so stretchy that I was able just to make them, and I have a very small waist or hip to waist ratio. There's just not a big difference between those two measurements. It's like 4 inches, so I can pull-on pants are a thing for me. I'm just very straight through my hips, so I'm showing you though, because when you're pulling things over, I mean, my hips are bigger, that measurement is bigger than my waist measurement, so eventually things do stretch out. So I'm also showing you, it's actually the same way that you kind of secure the waistband of the Mountain View jeans that we'll be doing here soon, but I'm showing you how I attach elastic to the seam allowance at the top where the waistband facing and the waistband meet, which is why it's drawing in like that. So I don't have elastic in the waistband of these, but I do have it in the seam allowance, so in the very top. So it's a thinner elastic. It's 3/2 inch elastic. So anyway, that's what I'm showing today. Yeah, so without further ado, I will get to that. Let's see, what else do I have? Let's see, Tuesday, yeah, either Tuesday or Friday next week, I'll be doing a Sew the Trends. So that will be up and you'll get to see these in all their glory. What else? See, we got next week, and then the week after we've got, I think I'm going to have, well, it's the Love Notion sale. So I'll be doing, we're going to have a shifted schedule that week, the week of the 18th to the 22nd, because I want to do a couple of different videos for that sale. That sale's only Monday through Friday, so just make sure you guys can get inspired and hit all the high points there. And I also think I'm going to have a pattern release that week, possibly, which is a really good one. I'm working on it today, so it's a good one. I can't wait to share it with you all. Okay, if you enjoyed this content and would like to help support the channel, I do have a Ko-fi account that's like a virtual tip jar. The link for that is down below. All that money that I raise through that goes right back into the channel. Like equipment, microphones. I've used my microphone on this tutorial. I've been listening to it back and it sounds much better, so I think I've got it figured out, but I think that maybe last week's issue was also maybe in editing. I mean, I'm still editing on my old editing software. I've not completely switched over to, I'm still learning the Final Cut Pro on the Mac, so I'm not comfortable enough to, I'm getting there. But yeah, so I don't know if it's something that happened in editing. I really have no idea what happened last week. So hopefully everything works out well and you can tell a difference in the sound with the microphone on the phone this week. Okay, that's all I have. I will see you guys on Tuesday. Have a good one. Bye. Okay, guys, this is take 2 with the new microphone. Hopefully this works. I think I may have done something in editing when I was working for last week, so hopefully this is good. Okay, so I am putting in a pull-on waistband for the Love Notion Duet Trousers. This pattern can be made actually with wovens or with knits, and with wovens it does come, you know, it tells you how to put in like a side zipper. especially if you don't have a woven with stretch. Now I am using a woven, but it's really stretchy woven. And so I'm kind of doing these like I do my Itch to Stitch Mountain View jeans. So I'm just putting, and I also have I'm very straight through my hips and waist. So I don't, you know, my daughter, for instance, has a much larger, her hip to waist ratio is much larger than mine. So, you know, she has a hard time, even with leggings that will pull up over her hips, but then also fit the small of her waist. I'm not that body shape. But what's nice about this pattern is that they have two different back waistband pieces, one for a curvier waist and one for a straighter waist. So yes, there's definitely the option for putting in a side zip in this pant if you need to. Okay, I mean, you could actually technically put a fly in. You would have to kind of draft your own, but if you wanted. Okay, so I am putting on a pull-on waistband, which means I have just sewn my side seams here of my waistband. So my outer waistband is already attached to my pants. This is the waistband facing, so this is going to finish the inside of the waistband. And I'm going to be finishing off the bottom here with bias tape instead of, you know, folding it under, you know, once it's sewn on, folding it under to finish off the inside. I just think it's a pretty detail. So what I've done here is, again, I've sewn my side seams on both sides. Now, if you were putting in a zipper, you would just leave one side open, the side that was going to have the zipper on it. And then, I mean, this finishes off the same way as if you weren't doing the bias binding. So, all right, now I have taken this and I have trimmed off 1/4 of an inch off the bottom. There's 5/8 of an inch seam allowance on this pattern, and I don't quite need that much because, again, I'm not tucking any of this under on the inside. I find this much easier to catch the inside by sewing from the front side. You don't have to worry about I don't know, you just have a little bit more leeway, and it's pretty. But I've trimmed off 1/4 of an inch all the way around just so I don't have 5/8 of an inch hanging past the seam line. That's a little excessive. But I've just trimmed off 1/4 of an inch. So I'll have about 3/8 of an inch because when we bind, we're literally just wrapping this raw edge so we don't lose any of the length on the inside of this waistband. So I've done that already. And then you'll recognize this from my harmony I made not that long ago. Usually when I make bias tape, I just make a ton, and then leftovers are usually perfect for projects like this. So this is just, I actually trimmed these bias strips 1 1/8 inch wide. I like to have a little bit of excess just with turn of cloth and stuff. And then I just used my little bias tape maker and, you know, pressed this as it went through. So it's single folded bias tape right now. So the finished here is like 1/2 of an inch, but obviously this is going to get wrapped. So it will we'll see that much on the inside of the pants here. And then with my pull-on pants, this is an Itch to Stitch trick, one I learned from them, to sew elastic into the top seam allowance of your pants. So I am going to do that. So I will do that at the end. If that's something that you are interested in knowing how to do for pull-on, like stretch woven pull-on pants, stretch denim, that kind of thing, I'll be doing that in the sew along for the Mountain Views as well. But yeah, I'll show you how to do that on this one too, because I'm going to be doing it anyway. So we'll do that at the end. If you're not interested, you can just stop the video once I've done this. Okay, so if you are putting in a zipper, obviously you will have a end here that has not been sewn, which makes this a little bit easier because you'll just start sewing, you know, leave a little excess there and then sew all the way around to the other end. But obviously I need to be joining this in the round. Now, technically when you are sewing bias tape, you should have your seams on the bias. And when I make bias tape, that's the case. And I'll even show you. Oh gosh. Not to knock my nice scissors off. So you can see the seam right here, and it's at an angle. So so the seam is on the straight of grain, basically. But then because it's a bias tape, you can see that on, that seam is diagonal. So technically, when you are closing up a circle of bias tape, sorry, I also have sun. I have one small egress window in this basement, and the sun is just pouring into it just perfectly right now. And that happens like 1 hour out of every day. And of course, that's when I'm filming. So, but I'm just going to sew it just like a normal seam. So I'm technically not doing this the way you should. I just find it easier, and I really don't find that it makes that big of a difference. So there you have it. Okay. My waistband is right side up. I've already gone ahead and put my tag in. I will leave in the description box a link to these. I get asked all the time. These are from Dutch Label Company, and I've got these. This is the sew-in one, obviously. But I also have this same label that has a glue backing, so it can be iron-on, and I use that for all of my knits where I don't want any stitching to show on the right side, or really anything I don't want the stitching to show on the right side. I'll link those down below though. They're good. This is my first time using Dutch Label Company when I bought these not that long ago, but they're washing and wearing really well. All right, so I'm going to start at a side seam, and I'm going to I just like to have a little wiggle room here, but I'm actually not going to start sewing at that side seam. I'm actually going to start sewing about, I don't know, an inch or so into the body here. And I'm lining up right sides together. Try and get this started here. And I want to be sewing right on that pressed crease. So I am lining this up, sewing these right sides together. And I'm just going to sew all the way around to the other side. And I cannot do this in a viewfinder, so I am trying to sew like around the camera here. Again, it's sewing gymnastics. It should be an Olympic sport. It just, I mean, if you get off the crease a little bit, it's not that big of a deal, but it does make life so much easier when everything folds beautifully when you sew right in that crease. So actually doing bias binding, I think, is a great way to practice sewing straight. One big tip, mostly beginners, where they will watch the needle instead of watching the fabric ahead of the needle, which is really what you need to be concerned with. If you're watching the needle, then it's too late, you know, the fabric's already there. So you really need to keep your eye right about here, right in front of that presser foot. So if you have an issue with sewing straight, try focusing your eye ahead of the needle. I love this fabric so much. I'm so excited and I think I'm going to have plenty to do another waistband facing as well, which is very exciting. All right, we're coming up right here to where we started, but I'm actually going to stop sewing, I don't know, about an inch, inch and a half before I hit that seam, so that we've got, you know, a gap that's here. But I am going to go ahead and trim those evenly. Just like having a little extra to play with. All right. Oh, yeah, I think I do. I probably have enough to do just one more waistband facing of that. That's exciting. All right. Now what I do is I'm basically sewing this in the round. Now, the reason I don't sew this in the round before I sew it on is because bias stretches. I mean, that's what's beautiful about it, and it's going to go around this curve beautifully, and then when it gets turned and wrapped, that will all be beautiful as well. You shouldn't have any ripples or any of that kind of stuff, and it should lay nice and flat. That's the beauty of, that's why we use bias. But it can stretch, and so I find that I'll go ahead and sew it in a circle and then try and sew it on, you'll either have too much or not enough, and that's annoying. So this is the way I do it. All right, so I kind of want to try and match up my seam with this seam as much as possible. So I'm just going to lay this out until those two meet right there about that seam line. And you want to unfold all your folds here, which, if this has been folded for a bit, as clearly this has been, can be a little tricky. And I'm just going to kind of work those up until they meet right at that seam or close to it. If it's off a little, this is the inside of your pants. It's not the end of the world. Come on. Okay. And then I'm going to pop a pin right where I want to sew that, which is like right there. Okay, so now look at that one to fold on me, which is good. I mean, you want those to hold their crease, but all right, so now I'm just going to pull these away from the waistband, and I'm just going to sew right along that pin. I mean, obviously you can't sew on the pin. Just gonna kind of pull that out as I go. Okay, so now, and again, technically you should be sewing this at like on the bias, but you know what? I find this much easier and it works. Okay, I'm gonna trim off my excess. Leave about 3/8 of an inch, 1/4 of an inch, somewhere in between there. And I'm just gonna finger press these open. Okay, so now we're gonna pick up where we stopped. And finish sewing this to my waistband. There we go. Okay, so now we have this all nice and sewn. Okay, and you can take that because this is gonna, if you want to hit that, you know, right there with the iron, just so it wants to fold properly there, you can. And I might do that. All right, so now what we're going to be doing is we're actually going to be wrapping this around that seam. Now, technically, if everything matches up right, that should easily just wrap and it would fit perfectly, yada, 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 just like so. Match up perfectly to your already sewn line. Very rarely does it happen, especially in areas like here where you have turn of cloth, where you've got just like a lot of bulk. So what I do next is I just go and trim this in half. So I leave like 1/8, maybe a little more than half, just so everything can turn nicely without, you know, like right here, watch, if we, you know, once that's been folded, it doesn't even want to like fold a little bit, like it's hardly making it over to the other side. So especially in those areas, I find trimming that down a little bit. So yeah, I'm just going to go around my scissors and trim this just a little bit down. I'll try and keep this in frame. Just like that. So I'm just literally trimming just a little bit. But I'm going to go around and do that all the way around, and then I'll meet you right back here. Okay, so I haven't done a lot of trimming. I've literally just given it a haircut because I want to keep as much of this as possible because it fills that area. All right, so now what we're going to do is we are just going to be wrapping this around. I may trim, that little area is just being very problematic right there. I may trim that just a little bit in that one area. Just want to make sure that that completely gets around there. So now I'm going to be folding this around, and then we're going to be top stitching this down. And again, hold on, I'm going to, is that better? I feel like my lens is foggy. Actually, you could have done this the other way, sewn it to the right side or wrong side first and then flipped it over. That probably would have looked a little neater, but we're fine. Okay, so now you could decide if you want to pick matching thread for your bias binding or for your the right side of your fabric. It is all up to you. But now I'm just going to sew around and fold that over. So that should automatically want to fold in. And then we're just going to turn it over that edge and sew it down. And again, yeah, it may have been just a little nicer if I had done this opposite. So instead of sewing it right sides together, if I had sewn the right side of the bias tape to the wrong side of the waistband, but either way works. I'm going to trim this seam allowance right here is just a bit. Mostly this fabric is pretty thick, my pant fabric, so. All right. So now we are just going to start and sew this right on the fold of that. And again, while my bias tape is rayon, so it's nice and thin, my pant fabric is thick. And you'll also find that once you get going on this, it kind of just wants to fold over on its own. Really that seam there, just where the seam of the bias binding and the seam of the pants met. I got a little nutty on that spot there. And again, I could have totally switched this to a red thread. I still have the brown in from my pants. And that obviously would blend better than what it's going to show, but and so, yeah, this may not look super straight on the right side. Okay, so there we have it. So yeah, you can see I'm kind of like going on and off of the sewing, which is not great. But we also are going to have a line of stitching to stitch this down. So I'm not really worried about it. But isn't that a fun little pop of color? Okay, now let's attach this to the pants and get everything sewn down. Okay, so I'm over at my home machine, which is obviously a Janome, as you can see. But I want to show you this number 10 stitch right here. See the number 10? It looks like a lightning bolt. That's the one I'm going to be using to attach my waistband. That's really close. My waistband facing to the waistband of my pants, because now if I were making this with a side zipper, this would not be an issue, but because I'm going to be pulling these over my hips, and while I don't have a large hip to waist ratio, I mean my hips are smaller or are bigger than my waist, so it's just it's like 5 inches or 4 inches. It's not a lot. My daughter's is like 11 or 12. So yeah, it's just not much. So anyway, so I am going to actually, okay, hold on. There we go. I'm going to be sewing the top of my seam with a stretch stitch. So that lightning bolt stitch is called a stretch stitch. And I'm actually going to turn my pants inside out here. Hold on. So my waistband has already been attached to my pants, and I had actually attached the outside of the waistband with a straight stitch, because it's where the waistband attaches to the pants is wider than where the top of the waistbands attach. Because it gets, I mean, a waistband is curved, you know. So the top of the curve, the smaller curve, is where it's going to fit the smaller part of your body. Okay, so here we have it. So my waistband has already been attached to my pants, straight stitch right there. Obviously this hasn't been finished yet because the waistband facing will get sewn and then folded over, and it will cover that raw edge. So I've got a 5/8 inch of a seam allowance, and I'm going to use a stretch stitch because I do want this to stretch, and my big machine does not have a stretch stitch. It doesn't do a zigzag. So we are just going to arbitrarily pick a spot, 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. To get used to sewing with this machine and with my boob not knocking my... Okay, hold on 1 second. I'm going to tighten my tripod. Okay, so hopefully my boob isn't like hitting the tripod as easily as it was just. All right, so small little zigzag. If you don't have a stretch stitch on your machine, like a 1 width and a 2.5 length will give you the same effect. If you just have a regular zigzag stitch. So it's just doing a teeny tiny zigzag, which is just going to give this a little stretch. Now, I could also use my cover stitch machine and do a chain stitch if I wanted to. I'm going to, which would do the same thing. That would look like a straight stitch, but it would have all the loopies in the back, which would allow it to stretch. But my cover stitch machine is set up for actual cover stitch, not chain stitching. Throwing tweezers on the ground here. So we're just going to go this way. coming up on the back of the pants that have my, you can see my tag. Again, the waistband facing and the waistband are right sides together. And we are going to understitch this, but it's going to be understitched in a little different way than you would, just because because I'm making a pull-on pant. Obviously, if you're putting in a zipper, you could understitch the regular way. Actually, you could use a straight stitch for all of this. You wouldn't have to use any of the stretchiness. But if you're using a knit or a really stretchy woven like I am, and you want to be able to pull them on, this is great. All right. All right. So there, oh my gosh, I'm not used to having to manually raise a presser foot. Okay. All right. So, and I don't even know if you're going to be able to really tell. It looks like a straight stitch, but it just gives it a little bit more give. So when it's stretching just a little bit to go over my hips, I don't pop stitches. That is the goal here. So I don't even know if you're going to be able to see, I have black bobbin thread in, that it's kind of just a little bit of a zigzag. So that's a stretch stitch. So I can stretch with that and it's not popping. Now, what we're going to do next, before I understitch, is I'm going to be sewing in elastic into the top, and that's mostly for recovery. So when I am pulling these up and over my hips a million times, what have I done with my elastic? Oh, there it is. It won't stretch out. I'll be able to get it back to where it needs to be. So I've got some elastic here. This is a 1/2 inch wide. My seam allowances are 5/8 of an inch. So you just want it, at least smaller or the same size as your seam allowance at the top. So this is where the waistband facing and the waistband connect. And I've just sewn it in a circle, just with, like so. And as far as length, I have literally just measured this around where these pants are going to sit on me and decided on a comfortable width. So if this gathers in the top of the pants a little bit, that's okay, because once it's on my body, it'll stretch to fit and you won't even be able to tell. Okay, so I'm going to quarter my elastic. So I'm just folding this area where I sewed it kind of in half and then pulling it taut. So there's one end. So I'm going to pop a pin. And now I'm going to match that pin with that area where I sewed, right in the center there. Then pull that taut. That will be one side. And then the same on the other. So that is quartering your waistband. That'll give you 4 equal parts there. Okay, so I'm going to set that aside. I want to do the same to the top of my pants, which, the easiest way to do that is just to match center front and center back together, because those will be 2 quarter points, and it looks like my side seam is going to be the quarter of those. But check and make sure, because sometimes, one seam allowance would be bigger than the other. Okay, so that I don't need to really mark those. I'm just following my notches. All right, so now I want to put my machine, I'm going to use a 3-step zigzag stitch, which means instead of it just going, it goes 1, 2, 2. Done. It does a stitch in between the zigzag. I use this for my lingerie, making underwear, that kind of thing. I just like the way it stretches and everything lays nice and neat. So I'm going to put it on a 3-step, although if you just have a regular zigzag stitch, that's fine. And I'm going to adjust this to a 3 length and a 4 width. And I find this is exactly what I do for, actually it's what I do for fold over elastic. All right, now I'm going to be sewing this onto, okay, let me think this through. I want to sew this on, I'm sewing this to the seam allowance, but I want to sew this onto the facing side. So, you know, you've got two sides to that top seam allowance, obviously. Here's my facing side. So I'm just going to pin this onto that waistband. My home machine has a much desirable spot for sewing because I just don't use it very much. I use my big industrial machine. Okay, I really just want to pop these in to where they kind of belong, and then we'll worry about like placement of these as I'm sewing. But this just helps not have to worry about, you know, the actual quartering part. So I'm just, all of the places in my elastic where I put my pins, I'm matching that to the side seams and then to center front and center back. And I am going to have to pull this elastic a little bit as I sew, I can already tell. But that is fine. Like, that is what you want actually. If you have to take, you know, pull it in just a little bit, that's just going to make sure that things don't stretch out and then you don't have your pants falling down halfway through the day. Which, if you are straighter through your hips, that's an issue. Okay, so you can see, like, there's quite a bit. I'm going to have to stretch my elastic as I sew, which is fine. Okay, so I'm going to be sewing again with the facing side up, and I'm just sewing this into the seam allowance. And I want to line up the edge of my elastic right to that sewn seam line as I go. So I'm just going to anchor my needle here. And, you know, as much as possible, and I kind of want to, I don't know, I'm just going to pull my elastic as I sew. But I'm pretty much sewing in the middle of the elastic. That can kind of be. And this goes quick because it is a long stitch. And again, this is all getting sewn into the seam allowance. I am not touching any of body parts of the garment at all. And I'm lining up that elastic right to the edge of that seam line that we just sewed all the way around. Oops. Wrong button. Alright. Do a locking stitch or a back stitch there. Okay, then I'm going to trim my seam allowances. Okay, obviously, if you're not doing a pull-on pant, you don't need to do this step. So you could have skipped all of that. But now we're going to understitch, which you will want to do this no matter what waistband you're using here. And I am going to understitch with the same stitch that I just used. So I am pulling my facing away from my waistband. And if you're understitching with a straight stitch, you just want to be really close to that fold line. If you're doing it with a zigzag stitch like I'm doing, I want that to, the far left swing to just be right close to that fold without going over it. And I will end up, I think, catching my tag, but that's okay. All right, so I'm just going to pop that in right there. And you want all of your seam allowance going to the facing side, so over here to the right. So I'm just going to, and I'm going to go slow because I am doing a zigzag stitch, and I am also sewing over a camera. So again, I am going to catch over my tag. I probably could have scooted it down, but oh well. That's okay. So you just want to kind of gently pull those seam allowances apart, or those two waistband pieces apart just a little bit. Even if you're doing the straight stitch. I've said it before on this channel, but I find understitching to be absolutely magical. It just makes everything sit so well. Almost around. Okay, as I'm coming around, I'm just going to trim my threads where I started really quickly. Get those out of there. All right, so now we have understitched all the way around. Okay, so our last step, no matter which way you're doing this, is going to be, we're going to go hit this with an iron, and obviously we want our waistband facing to cover our stitching line here. But I'm just going to go now, and I'm going to hit it with the iron, and I'm just going to place some pins here all the way along. Make sure you don't use pins that can be melted. Glass-headed pins are your friend when you're pressing. But I'm just going to press this waistband in place and just pop pins in all the way around. And then I'll meet you back at the regular sewing machine because we are going to, I'm actually going to stitch in the ditch, I think, on the right side. So it'll be hidden. But we're going to go and do that, and then we will be finished. Okay, we're almost to the end. All right, so I've got my, you can see, I've got pins. Pinning everything down. I've given everything a nice steam. I'm really loving this fabric. And unfortunately, actually, when I bought this fabric from Metro Textiles, I didn't even realize I thought I was buying stretch silk, to be honest, because I was looking at other stretch silks. And when it came, I was like, oh, I don't think I was expecting to get that. I think I just read it wrong. In fact, I know I did, because I think there was another one that was in that cart that I was like, oh my gosh, that's stretch cotton, when I was getting ready to check out, and I took it out. And yeah, anyway, it turned out really well because I really am enjoying this, but it's not on the site anymore. Okay, so we're going to be sewing from the right side, and I'm going to be sewing as close. I'm going to be almost kind of pulling that away and sewing right on that seam line, but not on the folded part. I'm going to be sewing here on the pant part, because then that little folded part will kind of hide that. I'm going to start right in that seam. Now, I'm going to be sewing with my hands underneath because I want to pull out the pins as I get to them. So I see there's a pin right there. Right there, we can start. And because we bound that seam allowance and we didn't trim too much of it off, we should catch underneath great. So, I'm using a regular 2.5 stitch, which is exactly what I used for to attach the waistband to the pants. So we should be good. And I just want to sew right next to that fold without getting on the fold. I mean, if you get on the fold, you get on the fold, but it is much, you can see it if you get on the fold. I'm getting really close. And then I'm just pulling out the pins below as I get to them. Also, you're going to see that my waistband, it looks like it's kind of pulling in here. That's because, oh my gosh, I just pricked myself. That is because my elastic that I have sewn into the top of the waistband is smaller than the fabric. So it is, I need to put this on this side. So it is pulling it, but that's okay because once it's on my body, That will pull nice and flat and look lovely. Really caught my finger on that pin back there. That was painful. And oh, no blood. So the trick with stitching in the ditch, I mean, technically you're trying to stitch literally right in that seam line, but really the trick is that you want to be as close to that fold as you can without getting on top of it. So then it's as invisible as possible from the right side. And you may miss a few pins here and there that are still in there. Ideally, you don't want to be sewing over them, but... Oh, and I have some basting stitches. My waistband was basted on because I was checking fit, and then I've got some stragglers. Oh, that was the dog. Oh, we're getting there, folks. My gosh, look at all these basting stitches. This fabric also marks, like I can see my pen marks, but that's okay because it'll go away with some pressing and steam. Whew! Okay, you can also see the drag of my presser foot. Okay, guys, it is done. So you can see on the inside where we've caught a little bit of that, you know, and we've got a little bit of excess there. That's why we trimmed that down. We probably could have trimmed it a little bit more, but that's fine. Yeah, there it is. And you can't see, you know, our stitching is hid right there in that seam allowance, so that keeps that all nice and clean as well. So when I do get to a point where I want to do some half tucking, I can again. But there you go, guys. That is how I do the bias finish on the inside of the pants. Now, if you were doing a zipper, you would just finish it the same way you would do the waistband any other time, as far as finishing off the ends there around the zipper, and per the instructions, you would just have a nice finished edge here instead of having to turn it under. So there we go, guys. If you have any questions, leave those down below, and I will answer those as soon as possible. Thank you. Bye-bye.